Good afternoon. My name is Zach Gibson, and I work in the Executive Office of the Governor. I will be supporting today's webinar with our host, special guests, presenters, and our moderator, who you will meet shortly. On behalf of Prevent Child Abuse Florida and the Department of Children and Families, welcome to today's webinar on bringing protective factors to life, social and emotional competence of children. We thank you for taking the time to join us today, and we look forward to your participation. Please be advised we are recording this webinar and will make it, along with the presentation slides, available on Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website at www.preventchildabusefl.org. For today's webinar, we also have 3 handouts to include the opening slide deck for those that were able to view that. We have that available as it has a lot of great information and resources to assist you in meeting your needs, or to assist you in helping you serve others who may have needs. So let's go ahead and get things started. To provide today's welcome, here's our host, Mr. Chris Lally.
Thank you, Zach. Good afternoon, everyone. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you've joined us for any of our previous sessions, we appreciate you coming back. You know, this audience and our team, which I consider all of you part of, is living proof of what our National Prevent Child Abuse America CEO, Dr. Melissa Merrick, says. Prevention happens in partnership. You all are the living embodiment of that fact. You know, when we pay attention to prevention, we know we save money, but of course, more importantly, we can save lives. So whether we're talking about primary prevention or secondary or tertiary prevention, when we all work together, we can reach the people we need to reach, whether those are children in the community, living out their lives in healthy families, whether it's children in care who, let's don't forget, odds are we'll be parents one day, or whether we're talking about kids in juvenile justice programs who really never had a fighting chance. They're just now coming to the grips with the impact that previous trauma has had on their lives. Also, let's remember, it's easier and cheaper to build strong children than to repair broken men. So most people on this call fight this battle in one form or the other every stinking day. Thank you all. Thank you very, very much for what you're doing for the sake of everybody. Today's Protective Factors webinar is the last in our series of 5, but I'm glad to announce formally, if you haven't heard me say it already, that thanks to your support, the tireless work of our team, we will be back. So please watch out for yet another email from me later this month. We'll have our next installment ready to go by the middle of June, and we'll be talking about different approaches to prevention in our next series. We're starting out with our friends and partners in Gainesville at Partnership for Strong Families. Some people like to call it Hogtown still. I'll let that go with that being said. They're going to talk to us, though, about resource centers and how they're using them to impact change and offer hope to the residents in their area. So don't forget, also, no one person reaches so high as when he or she stoops to help a child. Today we have another special guest with us to help answer your questions about social and emotional competence of children. I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment, but I do want to say thank you to Dylan Welliver with, get this now, I love the name of his agency, Blue Sky Therapeutic Services. Dylan, I think we can all use a little blue sky right now. So thank you very much for joining us. One final note, I'm always joined by my fellow team members without whom none of this would have been possible. I want you all to know how appreciative we are of your support, but also of your feedback. I learned a long time ago that when we start thinking we know everything, we really don't know so much. So thank you for your suggestions, your kudos for the team, and thank you for tuning in to us, not just for Child Abuse Prevention Month, but beyond. Now here's Dylan to introduce himself and get us started for today.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that wonderful introduction. As you said, my practice actually is operated by myself and my wife. We're out of Tallahassee, but it's an online practice. So we serve clients throughout Florida and abroad. And I'm super happy to be here to talk about these protective factors and in particular, emotional and social competence. So thank you again, Chris.
Sarah, I think you're up next.
Thanks. First, I just want to welcome Dylan to the webinar today. We are grateful to have you. And then I just want to say thank you, Chris, for your leadership and for that of the Department of Children and Families and the Governor's Office. We are utilizing a community cafe model for this webinar, and we appreciate the opportunity to share information on protective factors and how they can reduce or eliminate all kinds of risks. We will offer several participation opportunities to include using the chat box located on the right hand of your screen and the polling questions. So my name is Sarah Shepard. I'm a certified recovery peer specialist, and I'm with the Department of Children and Families with the Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and I'm the statewide recovery integration specialist. I also have 4 wonderful children. I am a woman with great faith who has 10 years of long-term recovery with substance use disorder and mental health struggles. In 2010, I delivered a baby who was born substance exposed. At that time, all of my children were removed and placed with family members. I've received services from Florida's behavioral health system, and now, thanks to God in recovery, I have had the opportunity to become a part of the healing of our system. I was introduced to protective factors in the 4th year of my recovery after having suffered several traumatic events while clean. I found out about the community cafes offered through Healthy Start in Volusia and Flagler counties, and eventually began to work for them as a parent leader, working with parents whose children had been removed. The organizational framework of Healthy Start is based upon the protective factors framework, which is focusing on what is strong with families and not what is wrong. I was able to see how they could help break cycles, not only within the lives of the families we were serving, but with my own family and children as well. My children have experienced a number of adverse childhood experiences as a result of my adverse behaviors and coping skills. And knowing that protective factors are teachable helps me to feel comfort, and knowing that by implementing them in our daily lives, I am supporting my children by reducing their risks and supporting them while they're on their own journey of wellness. I truly believe in the power of the protective factors. And now I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Miss Maria Long.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your personal story, the importance of the protective factors, and the impact that they've had on your life. My name is Maria Long, and I'm the mother of 2 amazing grown children, Nicole, 41, and John, 31, and 2 grandsons, Juan II, who is 12, and Jameson, who is 2. I was blessed to be trained in the protective factors for the first time in 2013, and since then I've been teaching them to organizations, community groups, families, caregivers, and churches. The protective factors have changed the way that I parent my grown children, and certainly the way that I interface with my grandsons, all in a positive way. I would recommend learning about and integrating these protective factors into your daily lives so that you too can be better parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and caregivers. I will now pass it over to our amazing moderator, Ms. Janelle King.
Thanks, Maria. My name's Janelle King. I'm the Interagency Youth Engagement and Restorative Practices Specialist at the Department of Children and Families in the Office of Child Welfare. I'm happy to be here today again with my team. And I'm excited also to share a little bit later about a skill that I'm very passionate about. It's called nonviolent communication. So as always in our webinars, we like to hear from you all and have you introduce yourself. So there's a questions box that's on the right side of your screen. If you can go ahead and type in where you work, your professional background, and what agency you're representing, if you're a community member or a parent. So we have someone from the Early Learning Coalition in Sarasota, Florida, Healthy Start, Bay County, social worker, We have Collier County Guardian Ad Litem. We have someone from Leon County with Healthy Start. We have Chautauqua Healthcare Services in Walton County. We have someone from Healthy Start Pasco. Oh, now they're pouring in. Sumter CAP Drug Free Coalition. We have Volusia County Early Learning Coalition, SEDNet 2B Project Manager. We have some other SEDNet folks, Baker County, we have LMHC, Healthy Families Orange. We have Drug Coalition and Citrus. We have people from Wesley House, Family Services, DCF folks, Healthy Start again, lots of different people from all over the state. So we're happy to have people with us, all of you with us, some people from DJJ as well. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to hand it back to Maria. It looks like we have a great group of people joining us again today.
Absolutely, and thank you, Janelle, and thank you to each of you for sharing. Since we're going to be hosting our Strengthening Families Protective Factors webinar virtually and not in person, we still want to share our conversational norms with you, or expectations, as we progress through this meaningful conversation together. These conversational norms will allow us to speak, to listen, to suspend judgment, and create a safe place for all of us as we navigate this most important and meaningful conversation. Thank you in advance for utilizing our conversational norms for today's conversation. Change. This quote about change comes from a psychiatrist by the name of M. Scott Peck. During the 1970s, he wrote a book called The Road Less Traveled. And in this book, he really talks about how it is we need to go and seek our inner strengths in order to successfully navigate change. So what do we know about change? We know that change is inevitable. We know that how we see and respond to that change is really what will make the difference. We all know that change can be challenging and difficult, particularly during times like these. However, we also know that change can allow us to see and to do things differently. Change provides us with opportunities for growth and exploration, for formulating new goals and plans, and for gaining a better understanding of who we are and what our purpose is in life. This can bring about better solutions and outcomes for ourselves, our families, and our communities. So remember, to the world you may be one person, but to that one person you may be the world. We've included this quote because we want everyone to really think about what it says. Each of us can make a positive difference in the lives of our children, family, and communities. We don't always know when that opportunity will present itself. However, if we can build and implement these protective factors in our lives, we will be better prepared to the world and to the people who are counting on us. So let's learn more today about this Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework, as they will be tools that will help us along this parenting journey. Protective factors can help us to be the best parents that we can be each and every day, but especially during this time of uncertainty. So before we start talking about these protective factors framework, however, we're going to do a quick poll to find out about your knowledge of the protective factors framework. Janelle, could you please share the poll?
Sure, Maria. So on your screen, we're asking are you familiar with the protective factors framework? Yes or no? So you can go ahead and get your response that way. And if the poll perhaps isn't working for you, feel free to type your response in the questions box. Just for comparison's sake, to let you all know, the last few weeks, we've averaged about half to 2/3 say yes, they know about the protective factors framework. So I'll give it about 3 more seconds. And so 83% of people say yes, that they are familiar, and 17% say no. I'll hand it back to Maria now.
Thank you, Janelle, and thanks to everyone for sharing. So the Protective Factors Framework is a strengths-based, and it seeks to help families identify their current parental strengths as well as specific areas in their parenting which may be presenting them with challenges and opportunities for improvement. In addition to the strengths in the families, information on the protective factors are an important part of reducing risk and the ever-present danger of child abuse and neglect in our homes, our communities, and across this nation. So what are these protective factors? There are 5 protective factors. They are parental resilience, being strong and flexible. Social connection talks about the fact that parents need friends and healthy relationships. Concrete support in times of need. Everybody needs help. Knowledge of parenting and child development. And then social and emotional competence, which is going to be the topic of our conversation today. We have recorded webinars for each of the previous protective factors that we've mentioned, and will be available to you via the Prevent Child Abuse website it was mentioned earlier. If you need any additional information around these protective factors, please feel free to contact Chris Lally, whose the contact information will be included at the end of this webinar. So today, we want to make sure that we understand the power of these protective factors, how they will help us to be great parents, and to bring about healthy, safe, and trusting relationships with our children. So what are the protective factors? Protective factors have 2 primary functions. The first is to reduce and or eliminate risk. The second is to promote the healthy development and well-being of our children. When we use the protective factors, we're helping to ensure that our children perform well in a multitude of settings and environments in which they may find themselves on any given day. Protective factors can help you identify healthy and constructive ways to deal with your stressors in a way that can help you to become once again a better parent, caregiver, and person. Stressors could include situations such as not being able to pay our bills, perhaps losing our jobs, lack of food, shelter, clothing, and transportation for our families, or dealing with a current or past addiction, perhaps dealing with physical and or mental health issues, or just becoming a part of an unhealthy relationship. So what is it that we know about protective factors? We know that families thrive when protective factors are robust in their lives and their communities, and that you too will strive if you commit to learning about and bringing these protective factors into your life. So how do we build these protective factors? First and foremost, you must understand that self-care is the first and most primary thing that you have got to do if you are to bring about building protective factors. You've got to take care of yourself. The second one talks about commit to being a strong parent. We must understand that commitment is a part of this journey to learning to do new and different things, or perhaps to do things differently. And then the last one really talks about a healthy relationship. Really is the critical, and it's at the core of being a good parent. Take the time and the energy to know each of your children and to build those healthy relationships. So today we're going to provide you with a high-level introduction to the social and emotional competence of children's protective factors. This is the only protective factor which focuses on the characteristics of the child. So whenever I teach about this particular protective factor, I'll always make the statement that I feel perhaps this is the hardest one for us as adults to learn, because we must model and teach our children this. And sometimes we as adults are not even socially and emotionally competent. So let's talk more about this protective factor called social and emotional competence of children, and why is it important to us as parents and for our children. So what is it? When we talk about social and emotional competence of children, what exactly do we mean? We talk about the fact that the early years are the most important period of physical, cognitive, emotional development, all of which play a vital and important role in our children's ability to learn, to grow, and to thrive. This protective factor talks about our responsibility as parents or caregivers to help ensure that our children are able to experience, regulate, and express their emotions, and to form close and secure adult and peer relationships. This means that we as parents and caregivers must understand how to provide an environment that enables our children to form healthy adult and peer relationships and to effectively understand and express their emotions. It is key that we understand the significance of these protective factors, as every interaction and experience plays a part in our child's current and future development. Your action and commitment will make a difference in the life of a child, their family, friends, community, and generations to come. We're now going to pass it over to our special guest, Mr. Dillon, to share more about this social and emotional competence of children.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. So what are these things that our children must learn to master if we're going to be deemed them socially and emotionally competent? So down here, you'll see a list of a number of factors that have kind of been identified by researchers as a list of kind of skills that we want to see in our kids and in ourselves to make healthy, happy adults. So if we'll look through 2 or 3 of these, but self-esteem, self-confidence, self-efficacy, all kind of boils down to, so there is differences and nuance of what these words mean, but basically a sense of worth, a sense of self, a sense of value, a sense of I can do this, I am worthy of. Self-regulation is about regulating our emotions. Personal agency, I like this one. It's really kind of means choice. Does our kids, do they have a sense of choice in their life, or does life just sort of happen to them? And you guys have maybe heard of, give the choice, especially for younger kids, give them choices of things that are okay with you, but it gives them a sense of being able to have a sense of control over their life versus everything happens to them. Really important as we get older. Executive functioning, that has to do with the prefrontal cortex and processing information, schoolwork, persistence. And so as we look down the list, empathy, social skills, morality, the really kind of the important thing to remember is the degree to which children embody these dimensions, these protective factors, depends upon, early childhood experiences. It depends upon these skills are observed and absorbed through the family systems, through observing our parents, to observing caregivers, to observing extended family. And children do what they see, not what they're told. That old adage, do what I say, not what I do. It doesn't really work. And so the best way to teach these, and Maria said this, is to embody them ourselves, is to demonstrate them ourselves. And I take a look through here, and I have a 1 and a 4-year-old. And I think about myself and how many of these have I embodied today and how many have I fallen short? And I would say a little bit of from column A, a little column B. These are ideals to strive towards. These aren't goals to say I've achieved it. Now I have my self-esteem. And the same goes for our kids. Executive functioning and empathy is going to look a lot different in a 2-year-old and a 17-year-old. So we have to kind of remember these are age appropriate. And we all kind of know what these look like when they're functioning well. And so studies have confirmed that children of parents who exhibit these traits themselves or take an active role in teaching and demonstrate these tend to perform better in school, relationships, career, and are generally more resilient. And we'll talk about that later. And then another way I like to look at these are the building blocks of resilience. And so I did quite a bit of work with the military these last few years, and resilience is a big buzzword now. But basically the ability to kind of get up after you've been knocked down, the ability to kind of take the slings and arrows of life and move forward. So yeah, move on to the next slide. So this little emotion chart here, I love this. I would use this in my practice quite a bit. And so there's a little snapshot of just actually quite a few of the feelings and emotions that we are able to express. I've seen charts 15 times the size. And I like to tell my clients, we can't integrate what we're unaware of. And so kind of fundamental to all of this, social and emotional competence, is being able to identify what we're feeling, being able to kind of put words to it, being able to be aware of what we're feeling. And this emotional IQ, emotional competency, it really ties into all of the competencies: communication skills, empathy, social skills, conflict resolution, kind of the list goes on. And the core is kind of being aware of and being okay with how I'm feeling. I've this become more and more clear to me with my own sons, and in my practice, that I know when my child triggers me, when one of my boys triggers me, and I have a reaction, I have an internal or external reaction, almost always it points directly to unresolved issues from my own childhood. And so my challenge for myself, my challenge for us, is to take a look at some of these emotions and sort of ask yourself, what is it that you struggle to feel or face? What is it that I struggle to feel and face? And what messages or how might I be inadvertently teaching my sons messaging that I didn't intend to. And so this kind of comes back around to the parent to be kind of the first and foremost one to kind of take the step up and say, I'm going to heal and I'm going to do the work so I don't pass it down to my kids. So let me give it over to Janelle for our first participant question.
Awesome. Thanks, Dylan. So as you can see on your screen, the question is up. How do you manage or regulate when your child's feelings stir up negative feelings in you? So we're looking for responses. And again, this can be in the questions tab on the right side of. So how do you manage or regulate when your child's feelings stir up negative feelings or emotions in you? We'll give everyone a minute to start typing. Someone says they take time to self-reflect. Someone says they take a minute away to pause, to take a minute out, to try to put themselves in his or her place. Internally say a Hail Mary. Step back before I react. A lot of people are saying pause, take a breath, take a minute away, mindful breathing. I walk away, I pause and reevaluate the situation. I say to myself, I'm being triggered and I either walk away or breathe before overreacting. I know for me, what I say is, anything I say right now to this other person is probably not going to be connecting. So I need to take a minute. I explain to my child why I'm feeling that way. I pause and rethink. So yeah, lots of different ways to regulate and manage when you're dealing with your child and they may stir up different emotions for you. So thanks everyone for sharing. I'm going to talk to Dylan now to talk more about social and emotional competence of children.
So thanks, Janelle. And I was thinking about my own answer to that question, and I like to think I do a lot of what I read, some really great responses, but not always. Sometimes I react. Sometimes I shout when I wish I hadn't. And so I'm going to point to this again as we move on, but it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have an oops. And I'll get into that a little bit more because I think this is kind of an important piece to talk about, especially parents, because we want to be so perfect with our kids. But what does social and emotional competence, what does it look like from the perspective of the child? What are some things we want to look at and say and behaviors we see? And so if you look at this, the bullet points here, what kind of stands out to me is quality relationships. Does your kid, or the kids you're working with, are they able to form healthy relationships with their peers? Are they positive relationships? Are they meaningful? Do they have these social skills and the peer relation skills and problem solving skills to make quality relationships? And I'll talk about that in a minute, why that's so important. But that's kind of one of the number one things we look at because we're social creatures. And parents can assist this by creating an environment which children feel safe to express their emotions, being emotionally responsive, and modeling empathy. I think it's also important to note that children with challenging behaviors are more likely to be abused. So that makes sense. Children that are just more challenging, more annoying, that have their own problems are just more likely to be abused. And so identifying and working with parents and children early helps keep these children's healthy development on track and keep them safe. Like Chris said, it's easier to repair broken children than it is broken adults, or make healthy children than repair broken adults. There it is. And also it's important to note, children who have witnessed abuse or witnessed or experienced violence, they need a healthy and safe space to begin to deal with some of that, but also to begin to develop normally again. So move on to slide. Next slide. So just a couple more things, what it looks like from the child's perspective. They deal positively with anger, their ability to play, that one's big and key, and the ability to kind of, especially at younger age, do non-parallel play, but do active engaged play, self-control, negotiate conflict, all the things we want our kids to do. So you know, we have to witness empathy to begin to practice it. We have to teach our kids to regulate their emotions when we teach our kids to regulate their emotions when they witness us get triggered. We take a deep breath and then we choose an action rather than react out of our pain. We teach our kids in the hundreds of thousands of little interactions we have with them over the course of their childhood. We teach them through the language we use and through our interactions with others that they witness. We're their early model for how life is. And so, you know, I am working with my parents. I come back again and again. Parenting skills are great and I statements, but if the parent is not in balance and it has a sense of themselves, that's always the first place we go. The other stuff kind of takes care of itself if the parent can be happy, healthy, and like you said, taking care of themselves. So let me give it back over to Janelle for our second participant question.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you, Dylan. So our next question is, how are your children similar to, or maybe and different from you? And the second part of that is, how does that affect your communication with them? The question box is on the right side of your screen. You can go ahead and make questions or your responses in there to the question on the screen. How are your children similar to and or different from you? And how does that affect your communication with them? All right, responses are coming in now. One is introverted like me, the other one not. Communication is very different between them. Someone said very stubborn. Someone said my children, like myself, are extremely expressive and it allows for great communication. Another person says they're stubborn like me. Same temperament, stubborn. Another person says I'm very organized, so when I get frustrated when they aren't organized, I try to teach organization skills, but they think they don't need to know. Another person says they're not like me at all, determined, not stubborn. Another person says my oldest hold things in like me and makes it hard to communicate, and the youngest is really expressive or impulsive. Another person says my child is a procrastinator, which drives me crazy sometimes, but has a sense of humor like me, which helps. Similar to my disposition, and we get along pretty well. So thanks for sharing those responses, and I encourage you to think about how your children are similar and different from you and how that does affect your communication with them. So I'm going to hand it back to Dylan now. Thanks.
So why is this important? What do we want to see later on in life when children are embodying some of these? So, you know, evidence shows early and appropriate interventions focusing on social and emotional development can enhance children's cognitive development, language skills, mental health, school success. All great stuff, right? Help children recognize their own emotions and emotions of others, assist in taking perspective of others and empathy. Now, one thing we know about emotional intelligence is it's highly correlated with successful relationships and successful careers. And so one thing that I find to be fascinating, there's the number one predictor, researchers kind of been able to point to this and be pretty clear, the number one predictor of happiness and success and life satisfaction is the quality of our relationships. If we have quality, meaningful relationships with our significant others, our parents, our children, our peers, our friends, our coworkers, we tend to rate our lives happier and more meaningful. By far, number one, quality of relationships. Number two, second predictor actually is how well we like our jobs. You know, and that one makes sense because we spend so much time doing it. And if our jobs are more aligned with who we are or more aligned with our values, we enjoy them, we enjoy the socialization aspect of them, we tend to rate our lives happier and more successful. And so why is it important to have these? Because we're trying to set our kids up for healthy, happy, successful lives. Another thing, mitigating the effects of negative experiences, life events, resilience, being able to be resilient and have negative life events, have unexpected situations like COVID-19 that upends all our lives, and get up and move forward. Resilience, big word there. And of course, support general well-being, physical, mental health through adulthood. So some other examples of kind of taking care of emotional competence of children and adults. And so these are some behaviors of kind of an adult we want to see in parents and adults that they can teach their kids. And Maria talked about this one, taking care of your own needs. And I think this is paramount. We can't give if we have nothing to give. And I've had clients come to me, quite often, and I felt it. I felt this myself at times, that I feel depleted and empty, and I just have nothing to give. And I think there's a belief in our culture that is somewhat toxic. It's better to give than receive. I think that's not a healthy belief. It is good to give. It's great to give, but we have to understand it's important to have for ourselves. And some of us have a problem with that. We feel like it's selfish. There's nothing selfish with having for myself so that I am then able to give and be for my children and for my family members. And so self-care it's more than getting your nails done and a massage and going on vacation. Self-care is making hard choices, but you need to do, like getting your finances in order, starting an exercise routine, eating healthier, getting better sleep. It's not always fun, and usually it's not fun. Usually the things we know we need to do are not fun, but we know is good for us. Self-care. And another thing about when your child expresses, back one slide there, Zach. Yeah, okay. When your child expresses their feelings and needs and being responsive, we got to be comfortable with our own emotions. We got to be uncomfortable with we have to be comfortable with our children's strong emotions in order to create that safe space that they need to express in your presence, to hold the space for them. We have to be able to handle their feelings. And my 4-year-old has some very big feelings, and sometimes it's really hard to handle the amount of energy coming out of him. And so be constantly kind of making myself more and more available to be there for him and hold the space for him. And again, kids trigger my unresolved stuff. That's what's coming up. And so if I realize if I do the healing now, I don't pass it down the line. And my ancestors and my children's children don't have to, they celebrate that. So yeah. We can move on to the next slide. Okay. Other examples, planning for situations that may arise. I think it's important to find a balance between being flexible and having structure. And a good question that I, asked my wife today is, what are we doing? Are we providing a sense of stability, but also flexibility to our children during this kind of time of crisis right now, this quarantine? There's we could go a whole nother 3 hours talking about COVID-19 and the challenges and opportunities right now that we're all kind of in this middle of, but planning for situations, but having the flexibility to change when unexpected arise. And so I want to emphasize again, these are ideals to move towards. These aren't something that we all have now, and that it's a never-ending sort of approach. So creating opportunities for children to solve problems, big one, rather than solve for them. Celebrating the positives. They say behavioral management, you want to give 10 positive reinforcements for every one correction, for every one negative reinforcement. Remember that 10 to 1, that's a good, and children's brains, they're still developing their communication skills. Their brains are different than ours. They don't have the same structures in place that we have now. And to remember that even if they're 18 or 19, they still don't have the adult brain. They still don't have the ability to regulate and calm themselves down that we do as an adult. And it's always important to remember that. And I think the next slide is, this wonderful, and this was in the handout, Nurturing Children's Wheel. This highlights some areas that when we focus on them, we can help our children grow and develop social and emotional competencies. And so we've kind of talked around a lot of these. And the last thing I want to say is the two that I find to be the most standout: give affection and give time, and particularly time. What do our kids crave? Whether they're 1-year-old, an infant, or 20 years old or 30, they crave our time. They crave our attention. And so simply making time for them to sit down one-on-one, two-on-one, and be present in their lives, give affection. I've also heard it said that we all need 10, 15, 20 hugs a day. We need a certain amount of physical time with physical affection, physical touch with our kids. And I know that could also raise some stuff from our own childhood. Affection was not given, and just being able to kind of work through that and give our kids the time, attention, and affection that they need. Everything else kind of will work itself out. So yeah, thank you. We'll go over to Janelle for our last participant question.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Dylan. So we would like to get your thoughts now after hearing some of that and reflecting on some of your own experiences with your children, or maybe if you don't have your own children, maybe people that you know that have kids, or maybe you mentor some children, how you talk to them so that they will listen, and how do you listen so that your children will talk? It's a good question and it's a tough one. So the question box is on the far right side again, and we want to hear from you. How do you talk so your children will listen, and how do you listen so your children will talk? Someone says they physically bend down to their level to make eye contact and be on the same level as them. To them, not at them. That's a big part of it. Talking to them or with them. Low and slow, quietly, slowly, so they have to pay attention to hear me. I try to listen without interruption. I try to use a friendly tone, not too loud. Calmly, interested. Let's see, it's jumping around a little bit. Speaking slowly and clearly. I try to be a good listener so that when I talk, they will listen. That's wonderful, yeah. I also repeat very slowly what I think they are saying. That's definitely something I'll get into in a little bit. Always on any questions they may have. When I decide to speak with my children, I sit them down. Let's see. Find it best to talk to children so they listen, is to respect them and inform them so they have someone important, so they know that someone important is listening to them. Showing interest without being distracted or occupied on the phones, that's huge there. That one's really big. And I am getting feedback that my mic is cutting in and out, so I apologize. I've tried several things to fix that, so I don't try my best here. They talk more freely, so thank you everyone for the feedback, and I'm actually now going to hand it over to Sarah to discuss how all of this plays out into the hierarchy of needs.
Thank you, Janelle. So when we look at Maslow's theory, it discusses 3 parts: biological needs, safety and security, and the spiritual aspects needed for self-actualization. In our previous presentation, we discussed the link between meeting basic biological needs and meeting the level of self-propelled willingness to change, the desire to be one's highest self. After supporting individuals as they meet their basic needs, we must understand that the next levels require an understanding of who we are, who others are, how to regulate our emotions in a healthy way, how to develop and sustain connection and relationships, and how do we communicate. If we are supporting our children or individuals we serve, we must support them as they find themselves. It is important to recognize that if I do not know how to do these things within myself, I cannot properly guide someone else. So most of the individuals that we work with have experienced severe amounts of trauma. It's important as we work with these individuals that we recognize that our bodies are machines. Our bodies are constantly trying to reach a level of homeostasis and balance and regulation. Increased traumatic events increase the level of cortisol that the body produces. These excessive amounts of cortisol are responsible for the flight, fight, and freeze responses when reacting in a dangerous situation. When this happens enough times, the body is unable to control the levels of cortisol being produced, and the individual's normal becomes a constant state of fight, flight, or fear, even when the threat is not real and it is only perceived. High levels of cortisol are what are responsible for adverse health outcomes. When you hold your stress inward with guilt, shame, regret, and fear, research has shown a higher link to cancer and autoimmune disorders. When you express yourself outwardly, such as with anger, fighting, screaming, you are at a higher risk for stroke and heart attack. Many of us have heard of PTSD, less known as complex PTSD, where several traumatic experiences alter the shape of your brain and the way it functions. Oftentimes, we make the mistake of believing that traditional PTSD treatments will work for this, and we get frustrated with individuals who aren't getting better. More often, the individual is just as frustrated with themselves and why they can't get better. However, there are treatments out there and there is hope. When I meet with people who suffer this way as a result of what they have been through, I tell them that it's okay, that they are not crazy. They are just having a normal response to abnormal traumatic events, and their bodies are just signaling to them that they need some extra help and support. So through this series, I have talked a lot about my trauma and how a lack of emotional guidance caused me to struggle. It is important to point out today that it was not the lack of emotional guidance that caused me to be an addict. It was the way the lack of emotional guidance left me fending for myself during critical periods of life and life experiences that shaped my perception of how I saw myself, how I felt unsafe internally and externally in the world. I was constantly driven by fear. When I used drugs and alcohol in those moments, I found relief. Enough times of using to self-soothe, and I developed a severe physical and psychological dependence in which my brain told my body that it had to use in order to stay alive. So when I was in the first grade, there was a boy at my bus stop who was just a little older than me, and he took me into his house and he held a machete to my neck. My brother came to save me. He came to the door. The boy tried to stab my brother in the heart. My brother grabbed the machete and it sliced open my brother's main vein in his hand. The boy's younger brother sprayed the boy in the eyes with hairspray, and I was able to run out of the door and escape and try and get some help. That is all I really remember about that event. 2 years ago, my mom told my kids about it. I had forgotten about the event, and I asked them why we never saw a counselor, a social worker, or a police officer. Her response was that she didn't want it to be a big deal. That situation was a big deal, and it was a dangerous situation filled with lots of fear and anxiety and worry. And instead of being given the help that we needed to work through the fear, we were taught to bury it as if it didn't exist and it never happened. I once knew someone that I was very close with. We were young moms together, with our first babies being 7 weeks apart. I was nearing the due date, and I was in active addiction with my fourth baby when her second child passed away due to an unforeseen illness. I got clean, she stayed strong, and helped me rise back to my feet. A few years later, filled with shame, she reached out for some help. She couldn't stop thinking about the loss of her baby and started to cope in unhealthy ways. We walked together through her journey for a while, and I supported her in her recovery. She got pregnant again with another girl, stopped using, delivered a healthy baby, and was a great mom. When her child reached the age of her angel baby, she fell back into the behaviors because the pain was too great and she had not dealt with the trauma. 10 years after her first daughter died, she went to join her in heaven. She had no idea how to process her emotions. She was not a typical addict, but a grieving mother who struggled with losing her baby as a result of an illness and did not know how to handle her emotions.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that really powerful story.
Sorry,
I
Janelle.
see you're on mute. Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't done. Can I do one more?
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay, I don't know how that happened. Okay, so where did it end?
You had just finished sharing your story.
Okay, so when my first daughter was born, I loved her more than anything. I was quite unmanageable and I was pretty much a hot mess, but I was not yet an addict. Shaken baby syndrome had been on the rise, and so doctors had suggested the cry it out baby phase. So during the first 2 years of her life, I was stable, consistent, loving, and probably overly attentive at times. The only thing is I was 19 and newly married, and I let her cry it out more than I should have. Now, at 16, she often feels unsafe. For years, she calls to make sure that the doors are locked and the windows are closed before we go to sleep at night. She struggles with feeling unsafe. Research has shown that when a baby cries it out, it often causes them to feel intense fear. Even in enough times of this, and like anything else trauma related, their brains cannot turn it off. So as a result of what we have experienced, trauma and fear can alter our brain shape, our brain chemicals, which will influence how we react and how we perceive future experiences. These 3 stories give examples of why it is important to parent with knowledge of social and emotional competence of children and ourselves. How are we helping our children to communicate? How are we supporting them as they learn healthy relationship skills? And how are we teaching them to handle emotions, both positive and negative? When we are able to effectively do this within ourselves, we can pass it along to our children. When we practice social and emotional competence, we are breaking generational curses, internal voices that hold us back. We have the ability to stop self-medicating, and we can create true connection and healing within our families, which will then help to build healthier communities. So now I'll pass it to Janelle. Thanks, Janelle. Sorry about that.
No, you're totally fine. Thank you, Sarah. I really, really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that story there and those examples. So we'll transition a little bit here. You can see on the screen, we're going to be talking about nonviolent communication. So nonviolent communication is really a communication process that was developed by Marshall Rosenberg in the 1960s. NVC for short includes a concrete set of communication tools that really help us hear difficult messages and identify our own and others' feelings and needs. NVC is based on the idea that all human beings are simply trying to get their needs met and that we as humans share universal needs. Marshall Rosenberg says all conflict is a tragic expression of an unmet need. Again, that's all conflict is a tragic expression of an unmet need, meaning we have needs underneath conflict and in life in general, and we just haven't been educated to speak from this lens. As the restorative practices specialist at DCF, I have the opportunity to train on this skill in group homes across the state. When I do, I always start off by borrowing an activity done around the world by an NVC trainer. She asks people, if you could have a perfect world, what would be in it? And not material things, but more so of abstract concepts. Time and time again, even when I do this activity with young people and staff alike, we pretty much get the same list of values or needs. Things like connection, trust, to be heard and valued, support, peace, and ease are pretty much always named. And in NVC2, we differentiate between strategies and needs. By this, I mean there are many different ways to get a need met. Strategies are getting stuck pretty much in one way. For example, saying, I need you to be quiet is a strategy, but it's not a need. The underlying might be expressed as I need to be heard or understood. And if we were to jump straight into a solution or strategy, we actually miss out on expressing the need and may not see the most effective or achievable strategy for meeting it. So whereas NVC is really a method for transforming conflicts while allowing with choice and honesty. And so we already highlighted some of the differences between needs and strategies, but as a reminder, needs are really the crux of nonviolent communication. And really, on the next slide, it talks about feelings are really those pointers to whether our needs are getting met or not. But like Dylan previously mentioned, many of us have not been educated to talk about our feelings. And even more so, most of us don't even have that cognitive awareness that these feelings are present during or after a conflict. Furthermore, most of us have a pretty limited vocabulary, especially at younger ages, when it comes to expressing our feelings. And it may be limited to things like good, bad, happy, angry, or we may say things like, I feel like you're being disrespectful, or I feel manipulated. The challenge with those two examples is that those are not actually feelings. I feel like you're being disrespectful, or I feel manipulated. What we're doing with those is we're masking those feelings with judgments and evaluations. And in NVC, nonviolent communication, we call those thought feelings. Anytime a sentence begins with I feel like or I feel that, it's more likely than not going to be a thought feeling. So if I were to tell you, I feel like you just don't care about me at all, versus I feel hurt, withdrawn, and lonely because I really want connection with you and to know that I matter. Which one will land better and not add more fuel to the fire for the other person? And so really, why does this matter? Why does this matter about how we language our feelings? Well, it matters because once you use language that contains evaluations and judgments, it's almost that the other person will push back, start arguing back, and it'll probably escalate from there. I'm getting some text that my sound is going in and out. I'm just going to keep going and hope that everything is working. So it's almost guaranteed that the other person will push back if we have evaluations asked by our feelings. A response that someone could say back to that is, "What are you talking about? I do care about you. I do all the dishes every night. I listen to you when you're complaining. I rub your feet at night." And you start really arguing at the strategy level there. And what we mean by that is when you argue at the strategy level, it doesn't really do too much. What's really underneath that is the feelings and the needs. And the feelings may be, that you're hurt, withdrawn, or lonely. And more importantly, the needs are about maybe wanting connection and to know that I matter. And there's really not much to argue with someone if they start from that point of the conversation. So speaking to the last bullet point on the screen, guessing feelings and needs is a critical component of empathy, but it gets built on by adding these other two things on there, which talk about presence and understanding. So when we talk about presence, it's not just about physically being with another person, it's really more than that. It's about mentally, spiritually, emotionally with them. When someone's talking to us about a concern or issue they have, we often want to relate and make it about ourselves. And we'll get to this more later on the next slide, but we may have the urge because we feel bad or feel guilty. Sometimes we may want to correct the person that's coming to us or explain the situation from our perspective. Sometimes our mind wanders to something else, and maybe that's happening for you right now in this webinar. Maybe your mind is somewhere else, and that's totally okay. It just simply means that we're not being present with the other person. And it's funny, I'm tracking the attentiveness, and as I said that, the attentiveness went up. So it just simply means that we're not present with the other person. So it's really about a conscious awareness and trying to stay with that other person with withholding judgment and evaluation. So I know I'm saying a lot, but think about how often, especially when you're in a conflict with someone, if you can go back, Zach, you're totally not really with them. You're thinking about what you're going to say next and how wrong they are and how incorrect they are. It's simply not. So I encourage you to start today by trying to build or strengthen this muscle of awareness about how present you are with other people, especially when you're in a conflict with them, which gets hard. So about that understanding piece, this element is about trying to understand someone in the way that they would most like to be heard, that reflects what they're saying. So some of you answered to one of our questions. A lot of you said by reflecting and reframing what you're hearing them say. And so it's really not about agreeing with what they're saying. You may not agree at all, but in the process, there's an opportunity for you to express that with your observations. But how we show our understanding is really about reflecting and summarizing what you're hearing the other person say. And the last part is the feelings and needs guesses. Remember, feelings are just simply the pointers. It's almost like a flashlight shining the light on whether our needs are getting met or not. And on the handout on the webinar, you can download the handouts. There's the feelings and the needs sheet. If you're looking at the second half or the second page of this sheet, the top half of the feelings tend to be more like positive feelings. So if you generally have more positive feelings, it's typically because our needs are getting met in a moment. And then if our feelings are on the bottom half of that sheet, it's probably because our needs are not getting met. And it's also about guesses. You never want to tell someone what they're feeling and needing because we don't actually know. So you would say something, I'm wondering if you're upset because you want some space. And a note to that too, before I get into a quick story, and then we'll do an activity with Chris. I wanted to make a note that saying something like, I need you to take out the trash, that's not an actual need. The need behind that may be for cooperation or consideration. But even harder is as the listener, often things come out to us, people are talking to us as thoughts and judgments. And this gets to my next story. And the listener would then have to translate those thoughts and those evaluations into their best guesses of the needs for that person. And that's really hard. Like that's really, really hard to do. So I wanted to highlight an example here. So I've been offering Zoom empathy sessions for youth in foster and group homes and also staff and caregivers as a response to conflicts because of the quarantine. And on Wednesday, with 4 young ladies and giving empathy specifically to one of them. She was talking about the disagreement she got into with a staff the other morning. After giving her empathy, again, being what that means is being present with her, reflecting back what I was hearing her say, and guessing her feelings, which included saying that she was feeling frustrated, annoyed, and confused, and that she was really like communication, ease, and freedom. After about 10 minutes of that, I noticed she started to physically change. She was less hyped up and her energy seemed to calm. This is what we refer to as taming the lizard brain or calming the amygdala. We stayed in this process for about 10 minutes. I then asked if she could possibly think about what the staff person was feeling and needing. Sorry, I lost my spot. What the staff person was feeling and needing in that situation, which is definitely no easy task at all. And what I was asking her to do was put herself in the other person's shoes, what we typically think of when we hear the word empathy. She stayed quiet for a few minutes and then turned around on the camera, and I noticed the staff was actually sitting in the opposite corner of the room, and the young girl said, I don't know, what are you feeling and needing? The staff responded with energy that honestly made me pretty nervous. She said something like, well, I don't have feelings, but I just feel like she's disrespecting me. Ideally, I would have given empathy separately to each of the 2 of them to fully allow both of them to be heard. Then if they were ready to have a face-to-face conversation, I would have pulled them together and used this process. But we just rolled with this real-life conflict mediation process. And so I have a question for you all. When I shared the staff's response, did you notice what her thought feeling was? It was, I feel like she is disrespecting me. That's not an actual feeling, that's a thought. So if someone, think about it for yourself. If someone were to say to you, if someone were to say that to you, what would be your inherent response? Some of us would probably want to argue back and disagree and say, that's not true. I was not disrespecting you. The young person tried to quickly respond, but I said, hold on. I want to reflect what I'm hearing her say. So I hear you're having thoughts that she was disrespecting you. I wonder, though, if you were feeling frustrated, irritated, and annoyed because you wanted respect, consideration, and cooperation. She said, yeah. I could tell based on the young person's body language that reframing this message in feelings and needs landed much better for her. In the end, we worked through the conflict, and when I asked the group to check out on Zoom, I remember both the staff and young person feeling something along the lines of relieved, satisfied. Now, there's so much more to this process. There's observations versus evaluations. There's requests versus demands. I just wanted to give you all a high-level overview of the process, and I would definitely, if you're interested in reading more about nonviolent communication, I'd recommend reading Marshall's book called Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. And the attached that I mentioned earlier of the feelings and needs sheet is a really quick, easy check-in way for when working with children and young people. And we had it pulled up the entire time during that Zoom session too, so that was helpful. So as you can see on this next slide that Zach pulled up for us, these are basically different ways that we respond to people when they come to us with a challenge that they're dealing with, or when we're directly involved in a conflict with them. These ways we respond are what we refer to as other conversational responses in NVC, or what empathy is not. When we're in a direct conflict with the other person, we often use some of these things on the screen, like educating, correcting, explaining, justifying, or blaming. And so I encourage you guys to take a look at the list and think about what are your go-to other conversational responses when you're talking with someone. And also think about which ones really, really tick you off when someone responds to you in that way. Maybe it just depends on timing, the tone that they're using, who the person is. And I also want to highlight that it's really not that these other conversational responses are bad or wrong. And I use around those words, but you have to think about what is going to be most connecting for my child, or for this young person I mentor, or for my significant other, whoever it is. What's going to be most connecting for them for the response? Do you think they want your advice? Do you think they want you to ask a bunch of questions? Do they want to hear you one-up them? Or do you think they really just want to be deeply heard about what's going on for them? So in NVC, try to start with empathy first, which again is presence, understanding, and needs. Or even maybe for ourselves, this is called self-empathy. What are the judgments myself about the situation or the person versus what are the actual observations and facts that happened? And what am I feeling right now? After empathy for the other person, if we want to ask questions or educate them or give them advice, we always ask. We say, are you open to my advice? So now I'd like to offer an exercise to drive this point home about other conversational responses. So Chris, would you be willing to share with me a challenge that you're currently dealing with? And I'm going to respond to you in a few different ways using other conversational responses. And I want to encourage you to really think about which one I'm using, which other conversational response on your screen am I responding with? And I'll pause after each one to try to figure out which one I'm using as well.
I sure will, Janelle. I could talk all day about challenges I face with my significant other and my child, but I'll do my son. So I want my son to learn how to cut the grass in a good way and to do a good job. And he just
well, let me stop you there, Chris, because what you have to tell him, you have to tell him exactly what you want, how you want it to be done, and you have to be very clear with him about what you want. So what one, Chris?
Yeah, I appreciate the advice, Janelle. Yes, thank you. I don't
So
know
that
that
was
that's solving my problem. Yeah.
so that was giving advice, if audience, if you didn't catch that one. All right, so keep going, Chris.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I try to tell him put the left side of the lawnmower on the outside of where you want to cut. Then just follow your tire tracks when you go around the next time. He just doesn't seem to listen.
Well, Chris, I mean, if you think that's bad, my kids won't even get up and do anything every time I ask them to do anything. So I'm lucky if they even wash one plate.
Oh, I think you're just trying to one up me, Janelle. Yeah.
Yes, sir. All right, keep going.
So I try to explain to him. I tell him in a calm voice, this is what we need to do, and this is how you can do a good job, and then you don't have to go back and do it over again.
Well, I just can't even believe how, he just needs to learn by himself, and he's got to get up and do things on his own. And I just can't believe your son's being so, disrespectful and not listening to your advice for him. Like, how dare he just ignore you?
I know, and I appreciate you feeding my fire about that too. Yeah. But really, I mean, come on, what else can I do?
So Chris, I'm hearing that you're trying to get your son to mow the grass, and you're trying to explain to him the way to do it and motivate him to do it. And I'm wondering if you're feeling kind of frustrated and maybe a little agitated. And I'm wondering if it's because you want some support or some cooperation.
I think that now you're being very empathetic, Janelle, and I appreciate you listening.
All right, so that's the end of the exercise. So thank you. Yeah, so if you notice that last one that I did there, that wasn't any of the words on the screen. That was empathy. So I reframed what I heard him say, and I guessed his feelings and I guessed his needs. So thanks, Chris, for helping with that. And I encourage you to try to start using empathy in the way that we define empathy, a la NVC, first with feelings and needs sheet, the handout that's attached. And it's by no means easy at all. It's taken me years to start actually using this process with others, and it really starts with yourself. Start thinking about whether what's going on in your own head or coming out of your own mouth are true feelings, or are they masked, and start thinking about your own needs in your situation and other people's as well. So just one final thought, remember that all conflict is a tragic expression of unmet needs. And if we want connection with the other person, the best way I've found is to ensure that's the best way to ensure you get there is by using this process. And if you would like more information on it, please reach out to Chris to connect us. And I would pass it back to Maria to bring it all back together.
Thank you, Janelle, for sharing that great information on the principles of nonviolent communications and how it relates to the social and emotional competence of our children. So what is it that we see in these pictures? We see reflections of positive, loving, nurturing, safe, and healthy relationships. We now know that social and emotional development of young children play a crucial role in the development of their cognitive skills, their social competence, mental and physical health, as well as their overall well-being. We also know that the nature of this development is deeply affected by the quality of a child's relationship with his or her primary attachment figures, which are usually parents and or caregivers. So let's all commit to becoming healthier adults in terms of our own social and emotional competence so that we can be better teachers and better role models for our children. Believe me, they are worthy, and so are you. So Janelle, could you please read our last participant question?
Sure. Thanks, Maria. So our last question, as you can see on the screen, is really just about an open Q&A for our audience. So we'd like to open it up for you all and answer some questions that you may have. We have about 5 minutes for our Q&A, so we'll take a few. And if you have any questions specifically about social and emotional competence of children or any of the previous protective factors discussed, feel free to in the questions box. And the questions can be for any of us on the panel. So Dylan, Maria, Sarah, or myself. I'll give everyone a few seconds to put some questions in. I don't see anything coming in yet, so I still want to give it just a minute. If you're trying to think of some questions, no problem at all. We'll give you a minute or maybe about 30 more seconds. A lot of people are saying they don't have questions right now. Thank you, though. One question, how do you show physical affection with teens? Dylan, this is probably a question for you. Show physical affection with teens who are pulling back from that kind of interaction?
So, that's a great question. And so we first understand that it's a natural process for the teen to begin to push away from the parent. They're beginning to differentiate their identity. And one of the first things they do is, well, I want to separate and I want to find my own self. And what do I know? Well, I know my family. I know that they're safe. And they kind of place their foot squarely in your chest, metaphorically, and push away. And so how do I show affection to my kid who is pretending, really, that they don't want anything to do with me? And so, that's a challenge. And understand the child does want your attention. The child doesn't need your attention. The child still wants boundaries, and the child still wants affection. And so it's going to look different for each and every individual. But gentle, consistent pressure, or how to say it, consistent pressure relentlessly applied. I'll say that again, consistent pressure relentlessly applied. Gentle pressure, there it is, relentlessly applied. So you walk up to her, you rub their shoulder, you pat their shoulder, you tell them out of the blue, how much I love you and how much you mean to me. And maybe they don't take the headphones off from their video game, but they hear that. And so you have to understand you're not going to get back the same reward from a teen that you might from a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old. They're just not going to come running into your arms, and you will eventually. It's going to be into their young adulthood, but it's getting through. And so just gently and relentlessly reminding them that you love them, that you care for them, and if they don't like you to touch them, you scratch their head, you pat them on the foot, but you're just consistent about it and recognize that you may not get back from the kid what you may have had in the past when they were littler. And that's normal, that's healthy. They're beginning to identify, create their own identity and step out into their own. And what they tend to do is distance themselves from the safest person they have, typically the mom and dad.
Awesome. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for that response. And I know when we were talking yesterday, we were discussing about brain plasticity. Do you mind sharing maybe a little bit about that, about the ability to regrow new neural pathways?
Sure, yeah. So neuroplasticity is a new buzzword in psychology and neuropsychology, and we're kind of understanding that habit and our patterns are simply their neural pathways that have been stabilized. We've repeated them over and over again, so they just kind of become stable. And it feels like it's hard to change a habit, but it's not that hard actually. And it takes 7 weeks to make a habit approximately, and 7 weeks to break a habit. And so neuroplasticity is this idea of, and this boils down to really in trauma. It's used a lot in trauma. If you can set a safe space that is non-judgmental, that is respectful, that is unconditional positive regard, whether in the therapy session, in the family system, whether in the school, in your communications at the children's home. But if they can feel safe and they can feel held, then they can begin to create new neural pathways to kind of counteract. So if one of my pathways is I just freeze up whenever I hear loud noises, and that's just kind of what happens, it becomes stable. In a safe, calm, open environment, we can begin to build new habits and new patterns and form new neural pathways. And I could talk about neurotoggling and different strategies for basically getting at that. But it's an old idea. Our brains are never really done growing, and they're really quite beautifully complex, and we understand very, very little of them. But we do know, and all the stuff we talked about, loving, safe environments can really shift patterns and habits and belief systems in the brain and create new pathways, and old pathways begin to die away and they become used less and they become demyelinated, and there's all these neurological words, and the new pathways become more stable because they're more anchored. Yeah, so I hope that's kind of what you're asking for, Janelle, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. And we have time for actually one more question. And I think it's again geared to you, Dylan. How do you deal with a child that wants too much attention but has behavioral issues? So they want a lot of attention, but at the same time there's behavioral challenges there.
If you find the answer to that one, let me know, because I have a 4-year-old who gets so much attention, so much, and has some behavioral challenges, and so I'm trying to figure that one out. But no, attention in children is always a good thing. And then there are different kinds of attention, and so a lot of times you're saying I'm giving them a lot of attention, and they're still acting out. So if a kid doesn't get the positive attention, they'll get the negative. But he gets a lot of positive attention, and he's still acting out. And so the challenge becomes, what do I avoid and ignore? So how to ignore a behavior and put it in extinction without hurting my child, without removing my attention and presence. And so we're learning about discipline, and we used to think going to timeout was we're starting to find about what timeout is. It's the removal of my presence. If you don't behave what I want, I'm going to remove my presence, and there's a message there. And so you're trying to thread the needle here. How do I ignore behavior that I want to put in extinction but not continue to provide my loving attention? And so what I always say to parents and myself and clients is, first things first, just kind of have the intention that I want to look at this behavior of myself and my child, and there's something I want to shift. And the more you put your attention on your intention, the more you pay attention to your intention, I'll say that again, your attention on your intention, the behavior and the things that cause it almost sort of organically just kind of fades away. And so in this situation, there's no answer, here's how you do that, but it's, I want to give my child this attention, but I don't want to reinforce negative behavior. How do I go about that? The best answer is going to come organically by nurturing that question in your own space in a loving way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dylan. Appreciate it. All right, so I think that wraps up our Q&A. We have a few more slides if you can stay with us. I'm going to pass it now to Maria.
Thank you, Dylan and Janelle, and to our participants who posed those great questions. This is probably one of the best proverbs, African proverbs I absolutely love. It talks about the power of unity and us working together to overcome an enemy or a foe. So what I'd like for you to do is just think about quickly how powerful that we are when we walk together, when we support each other on this journey of parenting. I would now like to pass it over to Sarah, who's going to discuss how you can bring those protective factors to life in your community.
Thank you, Maria. This is Zach. I don't know if Sarah was able to still join us, but I want to go ahead and talk about that community. Pardon me? I wanted to share that community cafes are one way to bring protective factors to communities for meaningful conversation and learning. There's no focus on where you're at in life or who you work for. but instead what experience, strength, and hope you can bring to the table as a parent. As parents, we can learn from others how they implement protective factors in their lives, and we can use that information to learn new ways to implement them in our own lives. By partnering together, as Maria talked about, we can work collaboratively to create a community that suspends judgment and focus on strengths. We are working with multiple stakeholders and collaborating across systems to bring protective factors virtually to offer supports to families in each of Florida's regions. If you're interested in bringing the protective factors to life in your community, please contact Chris Lally at Prevent Child Abuse Florida. So let's go back to Maria to bring this webinar to a close.
Thank you, Zachary. As we begin to wrap up this webinar in our 5-part series on the protective factors, we hope that you will reflect on today's experience, thinking about how we can become or how we can continue to be great parents by improving the social and emotional competence of our children. We would also like your feedback on how today's experience has impacted you. And we're now going to bring up our last poll question. Janelle, could you please assist us with this?
Sure. On your screen, you could see the question: has your knowledge of social and emotional competence increased as a result of today's webinar? So if you can go ahead and vote yes or no on that. Give everyone a few more seconds. And if it's not working, you can feel free to type it in the questions box. All right, I'm gonna go ahead. We're at about more than half of the people have voted, and a bunch of yeses came in on the questions. So we have 100% said that yes, they learned something new today. So that's great. Thank you all so much for your participation. I'm now going to pass it back to Zach.
Thank you, Janelle, and thanks to our special guests today, Mr. Dylan Welliver, to our presenters, Ms. Sarah Shepard and Ms. Maria Long, to you, Janelle, and certainly to our host, Chris Lally, for the great information on the protective factors framework and social and emotional competence of children. Thanks also to all of you, our webinar participants, for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. A lot of great questions, a lot of great responses we received. Thank you so much. And if you have additional questions that may come up after this webinar, please do not hesitate to reach out to Chris and his team at Prevent Child Abuse Florida so that we can get those questions answered and certainly help facilitate connections. As we mentioned before, this webinar is being recorded, and once available, it, along with the presentation slides, will be available on Prevent Child Abuse Florida's website. Should anyone have, again, any additional comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Chris. If you have any questions for us, the presenters, our moderator, what have you, please, again, reach out to Chris. He will make that connection. We want to connect with you, and we're certainly so thankful for your time and effort of joining us, not only today, but even if you participated in the previous webinars. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that we've given you some great information. We want to bring this information to your community, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us so that we can make that connection. Again, thanks so much for your participation. We hope you guys have an amazing evening. Thank you so much.
And happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
Thank you, Janelle. I just saw that, so thank you. Yes, happy Mother's Day to everyone. Thank you.